one of them. And that's what you're talking about. There is no evidence in this case that there was a ported barrel. And the ballistics guy that came in here and testified said I didn't put it in my report. And incidentally, the first person that did the report didn't put it in either. She's on maternity leave, and that's why this fella came in and testified here during the trial of this case. But the point is, I didn't know someone thought there might have been a ported barrel. And if you listen to the testimony of the ballistic expert, he said possibly a ported barrel. But why does it have to be a ported barrel? And remember that these were jacketed bullets, and when the jackets come off of the bullets after striking something, that's where you look to see if there's a port, not on the spent projectile or lead core of the bullet. So yeah, I questioned it. But they need a ported barrel. Why? Because that's what Jordan Thomas said. Jordan Thomas, the guy who knew two magical bits of information. How did he know them? I don't know. When did he know them? We don't know. But what he told law enforcement was that he got a call from somebody named Chris, who shared with him everything about the Lil Phat murder, is what he said. I like what Mr. Shard said. It's Melvin Vernell III. But what were the two secrets that nobody else knew? That there were trackers in the vehicle, and that wasn't learned, according to J.T. Williams, until February of 2013, which is wrong. It's when they pulled it out of the vehicle. They actually learned on June the 11th when Dante Jackson, an FBI agent who lied to J.T. Williams about the status of an alleged informant who was supposed to be working on a case with regard to Gary Bradford and DeSensei White, and they were not. But Manny Chapayev went to him and said, hey, I've got some information. I want to tell you some guy got killed and they asked me to track the cars, and therefore. So on June the 11th, they knew there were trackers in the car. They just didn't get around to it until later. So pay attention to the order, the chronology in which the evidence was presented to you, but more importantly, when it was discovered. They have very few inculpatory cell phone records with regard to Gary Bradford. They have so few inculpatory cell phone records that they're telling you he must have had another phone. Well, who could have told you that? Hey, Grizz, now that you're cooperating, expecting a walk on all of this for everything that you've done, you admitted murderer. Did he have two phones? How tough would that have been? How tough would that have been even to lie about? He never said it because it's not true. They've got no phone evidence on Gary Bradford that puts him places that the stories you have heard say he was at. They don't have it. So they're asking you to infer. What about Calvin Johnson? Hey, Cal. What's shaking, man? Did he have two phones? I don't know. I didn't even see him on one phone during the time that I was in the car with him driving around. He never called the guys behind us in the car. I never saw him talking on the phone. What we talked about mostly was music and, you know, the business. And they're talking about the entertainment business. There are no phone records. There is one phone call that they are attempting to make inculpatory, and if you listen to their FBI expert, and bear in mind, folks, every one of their experts that sat in this chair is a law enforcement officer who has had law enforcement training to help people look for things that the state needs to convict somebody of this gang act so that they can bring in evidence against all of the gang members so as to taint y'all's minds about what actually went on in this case. And in every gang case they brought, and the officer that sat right here and said, hey, I'm the gang expert. Do you remember when there wasn't one? Nope. It was put into law right about the time that I started. They're all police officers. And they're all here trying to help the state to prove that these guys did something that they can't otherwise prove. You got to pay attention because they're cherry picking, ladies and gentlemen. They're cherry picking evidence and giving it to you when other evidence exists. Jordan Thomas, the link to the crime, who heard this evidence purportedly in Montgomery, Alabama, the day after the murder, tells nobody. He gets charged with murder. He tells nobody. How did he get out on bond? I don't know that. What else is he cooperating with? What is his hope of benefit for doing any of these things? You know, the state tells you we didn't make any promises. We didn't make any promises. It's not just promises with regard to the veracity of a witness. It is their hope of benefit in doing what they're doing. And Calvin Johnson's a perfect example of that. Jordan Thomas. You know what's interesting? In the controlled telephone call on June the 21st of 2012, June the 21st, 2 weeks, 10 days, 11 days after the murder between Manny Chapayev, the man who's got the very most to lose in this case, and DeSensei White. Manny Chapayev's turning on DeSensei White the minute he gets a chance. He's blaming DeSensei, and DeSensei White is calling him. And he's trying to get them to say stuff, inculpatory stuff that's going to help the investigation, because J.T. Williams believes that Manny Chapayev is truly helping with the investigation, when in fact he was not. He was helping himself with everything he was doing. And I don't know what Dante Jackson was doing, but you can be assured that the records reflected, and J.T. Williams told us that Manny Chapayev called Dante Jackson 8 times the day after the murder on June the 8th of 2012. And then the story begins to develop about DeSensei White and Gary Bradford, and turns the eye from perhaps the true murderers in this case. The people that had a true motivation to kill him. And who, Carvis Webb, donkey, nothing. It's just internet falderah. There was nothing there. We had nothing to follow. Well, I think maybe they did have something to follow, because J.T. Williams got contacted on June the 11th of 2012 by United States Marshal T. Banks and said, hey man, you got 2 guys living in your neighborhood that have a beef with Melvin Vernell, Lil Phat. And they tell him about Carvis Webb and about his roommate, Carvis Webb, being 5'6" tall, and the only suspect in this case to be picked out of the photo lineup, and his roommate is about 5'11" to 6 feet tall. That's what the United States Marshal's Office said to J.T. Williams. And he said, you ought to look at these guys who also live in Union City. Why? Because it fits their M.O. And they're soldiers for Lil Boosie, who was doing a stretch on some time that he had gotten after being acquitted of a murder rap. And Melvin Vernell the second, not Melvin Vernell the third, Lil Phat's dad, had Lil Boosie under contract. Boosie had written records that he was supposed to record, and instead they gave it to Lil Phat, Lil Phat recorded them. They were making a fortune, and they didn't help Lil Boosie while he was in jail. And Donkey was upset about it, pissed, according to the reports and the newspaper reports and the things on the blogs that are credible. Now, with a description that matched the description of the perp from the people at the hospital, with the fact that he had a beef, with the fact that he lived in Atlanta, with the fact that he lived in Union City, you don't think there's probable cause to, at the very least, get his phone records? That's ridiculous. He believed Dante Jackson, who lied to him, and J.T. Williams abandoned Carvis Webb, abandoned a possible suspect in this investigation. Somebody that could have participated in, with their phone records, they could have put somebody at a location that they couldn't put Gary Bradford at during this investigation. Now, Gary Bradford is a gangster because of what he portrays in his rap videos, according to the state. You heard Mr. Nielsen. You heard what rappers do. You've heard rap. Not every rapper is a gangster. Some rappers are gangsters, but please bear in mind that Gary Bradford had not been living in Montgomery since 2007. That was 5 years before this murder happened. And Jordan Thomas himself said, I've seen him here 3 times. Twice at a gas station when other rappers were there, and I saw him once in a club. Never talked to him, don't know him. Was he making that up? I don't know. You see, I tend to doubt liars, and I think that's reasonable. But how about the Montgomery police officer, the one Montgomery police officer that came here? You know, in opening statement, and during the trial of this case, we heard about an FBI investigation, we heard about an ATF investigation, we heard about the Montgomery Police Department investigation, and the only person that came here was Officer Webster, who seemed like a pretty nice guy, and he knew where the Ridgecrest area was. And yes, Gary Bradford has a tattoo on his back that says Ridgecrest. Don't know when he got it. Don't know why he got it, except for the fact that his grandmother lives in Ridgecrest. But be that as it may, or the fact that he grew up in Ridgecrest. But Webster said, I don't know him. I've never seen him here before. That's the Montgomery Police Department talking. And when the Atlanta gang expert, who spent an afternoon longer in Montgomery than Dr. Nielsen did, was telling us about Montgomery, Alabama, and about the investigations going on there, what did he tell you about Gary Bradford? Yes, there have been investigations, there have been suspicions, but I'm not aware of him ever being arrested for gang, drug charges in Montgomery before. Never been charged. Even Antoine Minor, the guy that came in and said he used to be Gary Bradford's middleman. Used to be in the Crips, but changed his life. Actually changed his life and got out of the criminal business in 2009 was his testimony. We said, when was the last time you had a deal with Gary Bradford? A drug deal where you were the middleman? He said 2002. 2002. 10 years before the incident alleged here happened. I'm going to get to some phone calls in a little bit from the jail that were made by Gary Bradford on a cell phone, and we'll talk about some of the things that he said. But every officer I asked, including J.T. Williams, and including the FBI, or the HIDTA task force agent that set up the wiretap, said he didn't know he was being intercepted, and it's likely that everything he said in the calls was true. That's how they found out he was dealing drugs. But what else did he say? I can't believe I'm still locked up after 7 months. I didn't do this. Why would I kill somebody because of what happened to him? Gary Bradford was not robbed. Gary Bradford, this isn't the National Guard where you go to Montgomery once a month and 2 weeks in the summer to be a gang leader. Gary Bradford says, what difference would stealing from him make to me? I'm sorry for him. I'm upset about it. Gee whiz, I wish it hadn't happened for him, but why am I going to kill somebody over it? You heard the recordings. Listen to him in the back. And bond? No, Gary Bradford didn't get a bond. But you know who did? The Sensei White. The Sensei White was cool, man. He murdered Lil Phat, took off to California, got into school, came back under the presumption of innocence and said, hey man, I'm just a basketball player, not guilty, I want a bond. And he said that he was playing basketball and doing good in school, so they gave him a bond. And you heard Mr. Banks jump up. Mr. Banks jumped up and said, over my objection, we thought he was a danger to the community. We opposed bond. But he got one. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. What about when he came in and said to you, I tracked him, and I killed him, and I was a part of it, and I conspired to commit murder, and the murder occurred? What about that? Party to a crime. You heard him say it. He should be just as guilty as everybody else in this case of all of the offenses, and at the very least, the state had the capacity at that time to say, now let's set aside his bond and put him in jail. He's a murderer. He deserves to be in jail. But no, we didn't hear anything about that. He's still on bond. And he's hoping to get probation. And he had a motive to lie. He had a motive to blame Gary Bradford and these other two fellas, Mr. Washington and Mr. Connor, who are on trial here. He had a motive. But he needed some support because his testimony wasn't that credible. And you remember the control call I was talking about on June the 21st when he calls Grizz and says, did you get rid of all the tracking shit? I need to make sure that that tracking shit is gone. Because, man, if that's gone, and Manny says, hey, man, don't worry about it. He said, I know about cell phones. I know how to deal with cell phones, and, man, I got rid of all the tracking stuff. They'll never be able to track you. They'll never be able to know that you were tracking it. Even though he was getting calls for the FBI, for law enforcement, in an effort to inculpate the Sensei White, and they did. Let me ask you this. If they got Manny to call to Sensei White, Manny had Gary Bradford's cell phone number. Gary Bradford didn't change his number in June. Give him a buzz. Try to get him to say something inculpatory. Let's get him involved in this also. They didn't do it because they couldn't do it, and you have the right to infer that because there's nothing in evidence to say that he ever did. You know, this presumption of innocence, it's not something that is, hey, we start out equally balanced and we just get a fair trial and see whether or not the state can prove it. You know, the scales are even and they tip. No. The presumption of innocence means you are presumed not to have done the crime. That's the presumption of innocence. As he sits there today, Gary Bradford is presumed not to have participated in gang activity and